and welcome to Mind the Gap, making education work across the globe with me, Tom Sherrington, and my great partner, Emma Turner. Hi Emma, how you doing?
By the intro there, Tom. Thank you very much. I'm very excited actually. I'm really pleased we've got our next guest on because we've, as you say, long overdue and we've got lots to talk to him about.
Yeah, we're absolutely thrilled to welcome Sam Crome. Welcome, Sam.
Thanks, guys. I'm delighted to be here. I wouldn't say I was waiting for the call, but I think everyone, if you talk to other people at education conferences, they're like, have you ever heard from the Mind the Gap podcast? Have they asked? We all talk amongst ourselves about who's been invited on.
Oh, God. Especially because we have our cunning rule of non-inviting people who ask. I mean, I always think it's a bit odd when people ask to be invited because you just think, sure, you've got other things to worry about than being invited onto a podcast, but we have lots of, things shift around or whatever. But yeah, I mean, I feel that it is overdue. And we want to talk to you about your book, The Power of Teams. And then also how, because you're such an expert on teams, how you've nailed teamwork in your new job as a head teacher at primary school. Yeah, so look, before we go too far, let's just get you to tell people who are listening what you're up to, what your work is, and, just recent things you've been doing.
Thanks, Tom. So my name's Sam. I've always described myself as a secondary school teacher and leader because that's what I was for the first sort of 15 years or so of my career, and really found an interest about 10 years into that in what and how and why groups form and fail and thrive. And I think that came as a result of kind of getting a little bit fatigued from leadership courses that were very individual centric. When you do those leadership style surveys, like, what kind of leader are you? And I think I did 2 or 3 of those in 1 year and just kind of almost ran out of the building. And I was like, I've done a lot of introspection, and now I need to know, how do I help a very disparate group of people do amazing work together to build something that's going to really make a difference to other people? And I didn't know anything about that. All I knew about was the kind of classic leadership cliche. So I just started reading and thinking and trying things out on the teams that I led. And eventually that led to writing a blog and then a book, The Power of Teams. And since then, I've done a bit of work across my trust, the Xavier Catholic Education Trust in Surrey. Last June, I took the call from my CEO, and he asked if I could help out at a primary school and be an interim head there and help them out for a year or two. And I wouldn't say reluctantly agreed, but I agreed happily, but also felt like I was doing something where I was going to be out of my depth.
Yeah, just as in a nutshell, kind of how's it going so far?
I honestly love it, and find every day very heartening and positive and really fascinating. And I guess I'm learning tons. I'm still in that point in the journey where every day I learn about 100 things. And then you go back and you realize the more you learn, you realize the more you stuffed up in the first couple of months. So then you go back and re-evaluate things you did to begin with when you knew literally nothing. And now I know a little bit, but it's a bit more than nothing. But I love it. I mean, I'm sure Emma can sort of vouch to the sort of, I know it's a bit of a cliche to talk about awe and wonder in primary schools, but they genuinely, that is what they are. And I'm finding even on tough days, there's 10 things that make me smile and really glad that I'm in that building. So I don't know what the school would say, but I'm having a lovely time.
It's the kind of the awe and wonder
that you're enjoying yourself.
Yeah.
I always think about it's like the awe and wonder, but it's also the hope and the joy. There's something incredibly hopeful about working with really little children. But I noticed, Sam, that you put on your social today that you're going back to your secondary setting to talk to secondary colleagues about your sort of leadership learnings, not necessarily about you, but about what you found out about the children from sort of transition to 6 to 7. So I'm absolutely fascinated by this, and I really wanted to sit in on that staff meeting you were talking about. So what was the kind of the gist of that? What have you taken back in terms of understanding young learners?
Well, firstly, that we're running a trust-wide initiative over the next kind of couple of years about, it's not called transition because that implies that sort of narrow 6 to 7 window, but we're looking at how do kids kind of grow and develop throughout primary and right into cross into secondary to try and help people in both phases to really understand the long-term journey. And we also realise as well that we're a Catholic trust, so a lot of the kids that come to the primaries go to the secondaries. There's quite a high percentage. So we realise if you have 2 or 3 kids, maybe, let's say, as a family, you might be with our trust for 25 odd years as a family. So we wanted to find a way of connecting and thinking about that we don't have all through schools, but we wanted to think about that kind of lens as a trust. So the school, my previous school where I was deputy, they were having their inset day on cross-phase work and transition, and running lots of workshops. We had children from some of our primary schools come in to talk about a day in the life of a year 6 or a year 5, and my musings today were, oh my gosh, primary school kids love leading, they love helping, they're hungry to do it, they're amazing at it, they'll try anything, they'll take feedback and keep developing how they lead aspects of the school. And then the big question is, once they feel like they've become competent leaders in years 4, 5, 6, when's the next time they get a genuine crack at leading across the school? And for some children, that could be never, or it could be sixth form, or maybe year 11, or maybe they'll do a tour or open evening in year 9 or 8. But I did a couple of interviews with children from my school and showed the teachers today. And it was actually, I didn't even practice the interviews with the kids, but one of my students said, I love leading, and I really feel like it's going to help me with the next steps of my journey when I go to secondary school. And I kind of paused the video and said to the secondary staff, will she get the opportunity though? What are we going to do to make sure that children like her? And she's like many, she's not like, unique. Well, she's unique in her own way, but she's not unique in terms of being hungry to lead. So I said, what can we do to make sure that all the children coming from our primaries will get opportunities from day one? Because they'll bite your hand off. Even if you said, oh, I need 20 year 7s to go around the school and do an audit with the IT technician about what state our technology's in, 100 would volunteer, and they go around with their clipboards and they do a sterling job. So, and that's not even a particularly inspirational job. So I was trying to talk to the staff about, and also just admit my errors in the past of sort of treating year 7 like they were a little bit annoying, or that part of my timetable was maybe more trivial than my year 13s who wanted to talk about Paradise Lost, and really just own the fact that I've wasted a lot of years not thinking about year 7s and year 8s as leaders, and hopefully it was useful for them.
So what's the plan? What are they going to do?
This was step 1 of the plan.
Okay.
I think it's hard though. I mean, I've been in various jobs where it depends on what's available. But I remember being in a school 20 odd years ago now where we had this vision of having every student having a kind of inbuilt responsibility, and it was fine, when you've got a new school and it's just year 7. But when you grew, like the scale of it all, you end up sort of having tokenistic jobs just for the sake of everyone having one and all that kind of stuff, and you end up with getting crushed under the scale of it all, which can be quite difficult. But like the one-off things that you just described there, are doable. And obviously in things like houses, I'm a big fan of houses because for things like art, sport, music, because you can give roles to people at a year level for organising events and stuff, and all of that. It takes energy. But yeah, I do think it is a sort of sad thing how some teachers, I mean, I've met them over the years who would, in a secondary context, will talk about the little ones and, oh, I don't like the little ones. So, and you think you should have seen them when they were the big ones, because there is a mindset about expectations and what they can do. But when you see it working, it's amazing.
Yeah, so I said to them today, it was separate from the leadership aspect of my talk, but I said, oh, by the way, here's a final aside. Watching year 6 in action is like watching year 11. The children understand the purpose. They're working super hard, but we teach them about spaced practice, and we teach them about kind of retrieval, a bit of like, basic memory science. We talk to them about what they're going to need to do over the course of that year to be really successful, and they totally buy in, and they feel really responsible for their learning, not in a high stakes kind of you have to do well in this test way, but they really rise to the challenge of kind of statutory tests or whatever. And again, then often they go to secondary school in year 7 and don't necessarily have the most ambitious curriculum. Maybe that's a bit harsh. Maybe that was a bit more in the past before we did so much curriculum work in secondaries. But earlier in my career, that was definitely the case where year 7 come up and they get a bit of a Mickey Mouse curriculum, and they've just come from doing something really challenging and ambitious, and they've really risen to it. And then they kind of tail off again. And that's certainly how I felt earlier in my career.
I think there's some things though. So I'm gonna put my normal caveats into this, because I think there are a couple of things which I always want to say here. One of them is my experience of secondary transition is that most kids just fly. You shouldn't problematize it. They step into secondary school and they're ready, they rock it, they're well prepared, they get on with it and they enjoy it. And it's like there's no dramas, and you can expect a lot of them because they're ready. And there, of course, are some children where it's a bit more of a step by step. And so I would always err on the side of assume they're going to thrive, because most of them do. The second thing is that there's an inherent change for when you go from a scenario where the same teacher teaches you most of the week and you can do extended bits of work integrated, to one where you have to learn multiple subjects. And there's a value in that. There's a value in moving to specialist teaching, and therefore the time allocated for each teacher is less. So it's just a different type of learning. And I always think if we get too bugged up on, oh, we've lost all that magic from primary, I don't think we have. I think we're ready to have a different mode of study, and that's just the nature of the beast. So we should celebrate. They had a great primary education, which is a primary education. And now we're doing a secondary one, which is slightly different, and that's all good as well. You know what I mean? And we can get a bit too sort of doe-eyed about the glory years of year 5 and 6 and how sad it is they don't have it anymore. But I think that's just.
I think the shift is. I think the shift, because I trained as a Key Stage 2-3 science teacher, so that right in that gap was where I kind of did my training, and I always seen it as more of what you don't want is a complete gear change. You want that sort of ombre. You want it. It needs to be seamless, and I think there is a body of work to be done on making that seamless, on capitalizing on the things that you said, Sam, about the fact that they are our biggest, our brightest, and our best. Let's not lose any of that potential in the situational move to secondary. And if there are any ways, like you said, about making sure that that's seamless because of the provision across phase, if you're keeping most of your children together, it's a really interesting area to dig deep into and say, how can we make it even more seamless and to make it wonderful for those children. So in terms of your work in primary and with teams though, Sam, was it directly transferable, the work that you were doing through your kind of power of teams, in a different, potentially smaller setting?
Definitely not transferable in a direct sense, partly because I work in a one form entry, so we have, and we're not full either, so we're not kind of having to sort of match our staffing based on finances. So I have a deputy head who's brilliant, but that's the leadership team. So straight away the leadership team is just a one-to-one chat, which is fine, which is great, but it means you don't have to consider all of the different balances of dynamics in the team, because it's just us, which is great in lots of ways. And then I'm just trying to get my head around at the moment in a one form entry how you deal with teams again when you haven't got two teachers to bounce ideas off each other in year 4 or year 3, and the consequences, we meet together a lot because we're essentially a group of 9 max if it's the 7 teachers plus me and the deputy. So trying to work out how purposeful that is as a core group, and then at what point we split off into other groups and what those groups would look like as well. And the thing I found is that when you work with such a small group and they're all super up for it and super keen and really willing to contribute loads of ideas, we can actually enact consistent change really quickly. We can agree on how we use mini whiteboards within a half an hour conversation, and then the next day I can see it in action and we can evaluate it really, really quickly. So that's been fascinating, because in the secondary school you kind of, right, let's go and talk to this team and we'll implement this, and then we'll go along and we'll sort of drip feed stuff in across teams. Whereas in this school, we can try things out and evaluate them almost within a couple of days, and the buy-in is not easier per se, but it's more efficient because everyone's in the same room together. So I'm finding that really interesting. So Yeah, because I'm not a specialist at primary, I'm not even close to being a specialist. I don't know 10 different ways to improve X initiative at primary or to raise outcomes by 5%. So I'm finding I'm having to listen and learn even more than I normally would, and kind of use the sort of coaching qualities, I suppose, to both educate myself and to move the staff forward as well. If that makes sense.
Mm.
But did you use, I mean, so I'm gonna, was it this conversation of sort of like intertwining your interesting change to primary, but also the team. So I was gonna just briefly touch on that. So I don't know, because as I always make this apology when I haven't got the book on my shelf, that I have given it to someone who needs it more, and I can read it online. So has anyone got it to wave around? The Power of Teams. Emma, did you find your copy?
No, I did not find mine. I even went upstairs and looked in my bedside pile in case it was
Oh,
there.
Sam.
Mine's in my snack drawer in my office.
It's great. So it came out in September 2023, and I remember that because you were sort of waving it around at the research shed at Parliament Hill, and
Yep.
but it's a couple of years now down the track, and then it's got some really good case stories in it, case studies, and a nice sort of structure. So I'm going to just read out the sort of some of the key areas you talk about, what a school team is, but then it's these key areas: belonging, team alignment, team operations, which is a kind of functional stuff, team dynamics, and team development. And then we got to talk about the last bit is building those teams. So it's really interesting. So when you were going into your new job, having written this book, did you use any of this conspicuously, intentionally to inform your practice, or were you sort of just feeding away and then later seeing if it resonated?
Yeah, I definitely still use the principles. The funny story about the book was that when it first came out, and I was the secondary deputy, and I was kind of pastoral deputy. I'd basically been trying out things and strategies and kind of evidence informed principles from the book over a couple of years with my large pastoral team. And one of the heads of year read the book quite quickly after it came out, and she said, "I need to talk to you about something." I was thinking, "Oh gosh, have I like misrepresented something in the book?" And she said, "You've basically been using us as guinea pigs for the last 2 years." And I
Yeah.
said, "Well, yeah, I had to see whether the evidence translated into an actionable strategy before I started recommending it to other people." So I've always tried to sort of walk the walk, and if I've recommended something, it's because I've used it before. So when I was going into this role, yeah, I mean, I was quite lucky because I'd recently recorded the audio version of it, so it was all really fresh in my mind. It wasn't like I had to kind of, oh, I wrote that 3 years ago. What the heck did I say in that book? And which I know all writers say they have happened to them as well. Yeah, so I did sit down. The big thing for me was because I don't have the expertise, I really wanted to get the functional stuff right. So I wanted to make sure that we weren't overworking staff with inefficient or activities where the juice just wasn't worth the squeeze. So kind of really paid attention to the operations side of the book to work out how does the school currently organize communication and meetings and the nuts and bolts of the systems. Do the systems work? Because I can understand systems, I can listen to feedback, I can tweak them, I can say do way less of that, we're going to prioritize this instead. So that's kind of the part of the book that I mainly prioritize to begin with. And the school that I was going into just has a wonderful culture, behavior culture, and it didn't need a brand new vision. It didn't need someone to come in and be like a brand new visionary leader, especially when I knew that I was only going to be there for a year or two. So I didn't want to create some sort of cult of personality about my vision when I knew I was coming in to sort of steady the ship and prepare it for the next person who might be there for the long term. So I thought, right, if I can make the operations of this school run as efficiently as possible, move forward some of the learning and teaching because the teachers are already hungry to do that. That's kind of where I started rather than thinking about right back at the beginning about my vision and all that kind of. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Yeah, did you like use like team structures, like to get everyone talking and that kind of stuff straight away, or how do you have like ways of running the team sessions which have a particular style to them, or do you just, I don't know. I mean, I'm interested in all those sorts of details.
Yeah, so for this one, because again, I was a little bit shocked, having not worked at a small primary before, that there weren't really teams throughout the school in that sense. Um, I had to rethink how I was going to do things, because normally I think about how I run teams, which is, I'm a big believer in starting meetings with like a learning activity that's maybe unrelated to some of the agenda items, and trying to get people learning and enjoying something that we can learn about before we get into the nuts and bolts. And then I would talk to my other team leads across my SLT about how they're leading their teams, to make sure that across the school, no matter what team you're in, you're getting a similar level of provision from your team leader. Whereas here, I quickly realised it was me and the deputy leading teams, and so that cascading didn't need to happen. So yeah, I've tried to kind of instill the same thing about learning as being part of what we do when we gather together in groups. But like I've sort of alluded to a couple of times, some of that's been about me learning and allowing the staff to take me on a little bit of a journey about what they value, what they're doing to help me learn, and then I can ask lots of why questions. So my style has probably shifted a bit this year, because I feel like even though I'm leading the meeting, I'm trying to ask questions of people that encourages and extends their thinking. So it actually turns out that they're kind of leading part of the meeting. We're moving forward on things together, if that makes sense. So yeah, I've asked a lot of why do we do this type questions, and tried to make it clear that I don't mean anything personally by it. I'm not saying your system doesn't work. I just need to understand why that system exists to begin with. And it's been fascinating.
There's a certain agility in a smaller team, isn't it? Especially when it's just you and one other person. You can just sort of go, Janet, shall we do that? And Janet goes, yes, let's just do that. That's great. But that's why I was fascinated by the book, which is when you're working in a big secondary, you can have members of staff who paths never cross. They just don't have anything to do with each other. Whereas if you're kind of on top of each other in a team of 9, I'm fascinated by what are the differences or the similarities between the things that work everywhere, whether you're in this giant sort of big secondary school, and the things that work in a tiny team. And if there are some things which are just unique to either setting.
Yeah, I think for me, the things that are always important, whatever kind of team you're in, is talking as a group about what are we in this for and what really matters to us here. Like why do we do this? What's special or unique about this school and this team that we're working in? Why do we feel like we're being called? I mean, we're Catholics, we talk about being called a lot. So like why do we feel like we're being called to this place or to this team at the moment? And kind of getting a shared understanding of what it is we think we're doing, like what is the thing we're here to do? Why does it matter to all of us? So that's the first thing. And the second thing is always talking about how do we operate as a group. I find that when I'm doing consultancy work and I'm working with teams on an ongoing basis, the things I deal with or try to help them with are rarely about this person has a lack of expertise, or it's almost always interpersonal. They've accidentally stumbled upon some conflict and it's derailed how they all feel about each other, or that kind of thing. So I often find that teams just need to talk about how do we behave as a team? How do we overcome challenging conversations or debates in a team? How do we increase our levels of trust so that we're actually not just nodding and smiling and sharing cake, but we're actually doing challenging work that moves the work of the team forward? So it's establishing those kind of norms, like how we work together, is super important. And then for me, it's always the next one is goals. So what are 3 things that we need to ensure we get right this year that maybe we hadn't quite finished before, or that's really important to everybody, and just sharing those, constantly coming back to them. And finally, I've probably said it already, like, what do you want to learn together this year? So I think if I say to my team, I think the best team's ones that learns together and thinks that one of their core remits, whether your job is to print books at the book factory or whether it's to lead a geography department, I think every team should see one of their core functions as what kind of group learning is going on. So what should we learn together this year? What's going to help us get better at what we're doing? And so those kind of shared discussions about that's the very deliberate elements of what a team looks like are super important. And then you start to go off into the minutiae, I guess. Like, right, how do we impart information to one another? Is there like a bottleneck of communication, or is there a deliberate approach to communication? Like, what's driving you mad at the moment in this team? What can we do what things can we take away? What can we improve? So, but it's kind of talking about really deliberately and openly about that. And I think you don't want to be like an oversharer or an over humble leader, but you do need to say like I'm inevitably gonna have blind spots when we work together as a team. There are things that I'm going to completely miss. There are things that are going to frustrate you. So let's agree now that we have a really functional way of dealing with those things together, because otherwise we're never going to improve what we do.
So have you had those explicit conversations? I remember, I think there's a golden time to do that. And God, every time I start thinking about this stuff, I just start getting like twitchy about bad experiences I've had with as the start going well. But you start off with good intentions, and I've worked in teams which I just thought were superb because there was a kind of the things worked, and others where things were difficult because we kind of didn't honour the things we were set out to do. And one of there's so many of the things that crop up. So let me just see what you think about this. One of them is I'm extrapolating from the one school, one team kind of scenario, because I think but even then, maybe you have to think about it, is it's not long before you become responsible for the things that are happening, and you're no longer just the new person looking in. And then, and that could be true of, say, like line managers in a secondary school or in a primary school. Let's say you're the line manager of the early years in a primary school, and we're discussing the quality of provision. You got skin in the game, and it's hard for you to be totally dispassionate about it because part of everyone in the room is discussing your work, and you're also then interfacing with the team, and you have to say, well, the team I'm working with, and you're there sort of going, why isn't this happening? Why isn't that happening? And then people get sort of a bit defensive about their team. I don't know, and then they start defending the team rather than seeing a problem to be solved, and all those sorts of interpersonal dynamics come into play. And I've seen that played out lots of times where people start being honest with each other about the problems, and that's where things start going wrong because everyone's sort of trying to big it up a bit. And I've experienced that a few times, and you sort of think, well, around this table, are we hearing the truth about what's happening? And have you ever experienced that type of phenomenon?
Yeah, I think that last question you asked there, are we kind of sharing reality here, or are we sharing our desired version of reality? Yeah, I think it's so labor intensive running a really great team, because that scenario that you just gave about the early years provision, if I knew that kind of situation, we're going to review this at this date. Okay, great. I'm a big believer in sort of scheduling things like that, like debriefing. There's a lot of great evidence behind, well run and well facilitated debriefs, and one of them is schedule things in advance so they're not a reaction to an outcome, so that then it's like, oh, the reading results came in, they were not good, and now we're going to talk about it, because then people come to the meeting with this sort of sense of trepidation, or is it me that's going to get accused of ... So I'm a big believer in scheduling them in advance and doing chunk by chunk aspects, and that gives you the opportunity to kind of go around to people before the meeting and go, look, we're going to review the early years provision on Tuesday at the meeting. Let's just have a quick chat now about what you think the others might say or what you're thinking, and then we can try to negate that person feeling like they've been kind of caught out or put on the spot, helping them to sort of pre-consider some things that might come up. I think it's really useful. And then afterwards going back to them as well and saying, look, that meeting was so successful because you really handled that with a lot of integrity and humility, and that's what helped us move the work forward. And also the way that you handled that discussion about your work or your team being so kind of magnanimous and kind of sort of productive with the way you handled it means that other people now feel more inclined to volunteer voices in the future, and that couldn't have happened if you were defensive or you were ... So it's quite a lot of work before, during, and after the sessions to make sure that everyone felt empowered and included, so that actually good discussions happened. And the worst thing that I see, Tom, when I go to observe team meetings, which I occasionally get asked to do, is that kind of unanimous agreement on everything, or like really softened feedback, which doesn't actually help people improve or move forward. And they're all symptoms of what you just described: people not wanting to offend anyone, or people not wanting to, if I give you feedback that you might not like, you might come back for me next time when it's my turn. So, but if I soften it, then maybe you'll remember that when we're reviewing my one, because I was such a nice person during your feedback, or whatever it might be. So we have to create cultures and teams where it's the norm to share openly, but it's not always easy, like you said. So sometimes you have to do a bit of pre and post work to make it work and keep people with you on the journey while you're doing that.
I'm just reflecting, Sam, on some of the work that I do with some, not all, some schools that I go into, where it fascinates me, the dynamics where the head teacher will ask me to come in and say, can you say X, Y, Z?
Yeah.
And
I've heard that before.
I'm like, can you say X, Y, Z? And I'll say, what's the rationale for saying X, Y, Z? And they'll give me usually a long, convoluted backstory about and how they've said it a million times and it's not landed. And then I say exactly what they wanted me to say, and it lands. And I'm just wondering, with all your work on teams, what's the dynamic of somebody else saying the X, Y, Z and why it does land and why it doesn't necessarily land with some leaders? Because I'm just thinking, if leaders can circumvent having to have that external voice, then that would be really useful for some of them.
Has it ever happened to you about 15 seconds before you start a keynote?
No,
Right.
normally before I have a team meeting, normally with a senior team, and I'll get briefed and say, can you make sure you say X, Y, Z? Or I will be told before a keynote, can you make sure that you say da 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 da? And I'm like, okay.
I think that's really symptomatic of a leader that's probably not going to be effective once you leave the building that afternoon. Because if they've relied on you to deliver that message, then who are they going to rely on the next week or the next month when they need to deliver another message that's going to make their school apparently more effective? So, and also their staff might take it really well from you because you're an outside voice and you've got clear expertise, but for the best will in the world, they're not going to remember that months and months and months down the line. And they need leaders who day to day are not afraid to deliver the right messages, but also who are thinking carefully about how they match their messages with actions as well. And again, a lot of the feedback I get from staff is, oh yeah, our leaders are happy to have a great debate and a discussion, but then like 3 weeks later, we haven't heard an update and nothing's happened again. So the leaders have to be happy to say the thing, but then actually do the hard work afterwards, which means that staff feel like it landed.
I think that's one of the things though that I mean, to put a positive spin on it, I think sometimes, and I've had this experience myself, where if you're presenting an idea to somebody, people think, well, is it just your idea, and therefore where's it coming from? But if someone from outside who has contact with lots of schools is sort of saying that, you just think, okay, this isn't just our thing; it's like a wider thing, and that there's a sense of confidence that goes, okay, so this is the thing lots of people are talking about, and that can be reassuring. But there's lots of aspects of team culture which I mean that, and they have to. I've said this on a few sort of situations where culture has to manifest itself in action. So sometimes the way you know the culture is through the way meetings are run, or the way people respond to feedback discussions and so on. But it's so interesting how in a where there's multiple teams, the culture varies. And I'm thinking now of a two form-entry primary school. I'm thinking of where the way the SLT perceives the culture, like through the year groups, is quite varied. And you've got the kind of, they're almost slightly intimidated by the year 5 and 6 teachers who are kind of super knowledgeable, long serving, kind of like grandees of the school. And they kind of like tentatively suggest things to them in case they're going to get pushed back. But they're kind of like all over like key stage 1 because they think they kind of boss that, and it's sort of, and I know other schools where the year group isn't relevant. It's like that could be totally the other way around. But it's the fact of the dynamics in the team. Sometimes they're like a group of like a GP surgery where everyone's like a qualified professional and they just sort of loosely collaborate. And others, it's where there's like a kind of like whip cracking kind of, everyone's doing this, everyone's doing that. And I know that I don't think it's good or bad about those. It depends on kind of how it works for those people. So that's one of the things I was going to ask you is, does some of this stuff kind of really depend exactly who they are? Or can you kind of apply general team kind of concepts to anyone? Or are you always just sort of forming around who the specific individuals you happen to have are?
Interestingly, I've been to department meetings before in really thriving teams and watched the staff and thinking, wow, look the way that this group is providing feedback to each other, collaborating on tasks, really meaningful discussions, energy in the room's high. There are some real, people in here you think, wow, they are high flyers. They are really pushing this team forward. But interestingly, so I've been in kind of staff meeting structures where the first hour is department time, like the one I just described, and then everyone moves off to like another meeting because they've got back-to-back meetings, like a 2 hour window. So it might be a pastoral team meeting or something different, And have you ever seen someone who is an absolute high flyer in one meeting go to another team and look completely disinterested? I've seen high flyers in a subject meeting go to their tutor team meeting. I mean, maybe they just don't love being a year 9 tutor, but being in a team meeting and they're the opposite. They're just scribbling in their planner. They're looking disinterested. They might kind of check their phone. And that's one of the things that actually prompted me to write the book, because I thought, okay, this person, you're the same person as you were half an hour ago, but something has changed. So maybe it's prior experience. Every time you walk into that pastoral meeting, it's a bit of a dud. The leader just goes through a list of administrative things that you need to do, and you've just given up. You just kind of switch off now because it's just a list and it'll be emailed afterwards. So what is it about those two different situations where you actually behave very differently? So I find that curious, and I think that's why, I think you are right, Tom. People are different, and not every team can be the same because of that. But I think we have to create stimulating experiences for team members that makes it worth walking into that room and not doing that thing instead of marking or calling parents or whatever it is you have to do in that precious time.
Oh my God, that's just like a knife through my heart, that memory. My first sort of significant leadership role in the school was a head of year. And a head of year in that school had the same status as the head of department in terms of pay, the banding and so on. And you had 240 students and you did the same, it felt, there were big year groups and it did feel like a big job. But you're right. I mean, the tutors didn't want to be at the tutor meetings. They're bringing their marking. I remember this one meeting, there was just the history teacher who was in my team. She just spent the whole time just going, oh, for God's sake. Like, I was just thinking, I was like 27, like trying to think, oh, I don't know what to do with this person. It's so rude, and she's not on my side at all. And I had no status in her eyes. It was like, that was a baptism. Now, but in your book, so I want to focus on some of the stuff. So here, like you talk about meetings, right? I love meeting dynamics. I think if culture has to turn into something concrete, and one of the most concrete things you can organize is the meeting, because it's like you can plan it and structure it. Well, it's Pentland says, 3 of the most important factors of how members might behave in meetings to make them effective. 1, everyone in the group talks and listens in roughly equal measure. Members maintain eye contact and use energetic gestures, so like they're engaging. And members communicate effectively with each other, not just the team leader. And I'm just thinking, right there, I've been to so many meetings and teams where that even that first thing isn't happening. Everyone in the group talks. It's just wow. I mean, that's just like, how do I get everyone talking, like in pairs and stuff? And I was talking about this with Simon Breakspear, who's just in our recent episode, because he's written this book called Elevated Conversations about how team dynamics work. And that simple thing of everyone in pairs, right, share. So you've got literally a room full of people talking to each other. I mean, that sort of thing is not super widespread, would you say?
No, not at all. And we've talked a lot about kind of participation and like ratio and stuff in lessons, but often you can go in teams and you can see that there are people that very rarely contribute to the group discussion, and you can see how it happens because team leaders, there's a challenge that the team's working on or a deadline. They go, right, what does everyone think? And Doug Lemoff calls it the tyranny of the first response, because essentially the first 1 or 2 people are probably the most confident and maybe experienced, but not necessarily. And often the start of the conversation, if it starts to build momentum because a confident person has answered first, he talks about how that becomes almost like the group's accepted truth, but maybe it's not. Maybe there are 3 other quieter people in the room that think the actual issue is completely different to that. But by this point, we're 5 minutes in, to some big talkers, having gone down a bit of a rabbit hole of ideas. And then we never found out what some of the other people in the room thought to begin with. And it's too late by then. They've given up because, it's Sarah's talking, and she's on one today, and they don't feel like they can contribute now because it's already gone a certain way down the path. So I think that's really worth being aware of. So you said things like think, pair, share. I mean, it sounds really babyish and patronizing to say that to a group of team, professionals, but actually what's wrong with everyone thinking, everyone sharing in small groups, then building it up to a group discussion on the whole? I mean, that's how you hear a group of diverse voices in a room, isn't it? So, but yeah, I would say most of the time I don't see that kind of practice in teams, and we lose out on lots of insights and expertise from people in the room.
I'm just thinking back, Sam, to some meetings I have either seen or been part of where some participants will turn up like they're coming to the cinema. They've got some snacks, they've got a drink. I'm going to sit down, I'm going to watch whatever's going on. I'm not going, like you would at the cinema, I'm just going to listen to what's being said and then I'm going to leave. And I'm not going to talk or contribute any way through. So it's kind of like changing it potentially sometimes from that cinema dynamic that you can have where people turn up laden down with their snacks and their whatever they're going to do. And that meeting is a meeting of people's ideas, not a meeting where we just sit here and listen. And I see it time and time again. And I do that kind of think, pair, share in my training. And it's still a shock for some people that, oh, I've got to do something. I've actually got to do something. I'm not just going to sit here and listen to that. So is that common in your experience, that you just will have people who come to the meeting because they think they're going to watch?
Yeah, I think, we know that our brains are kind of great predicting machines, aren't they? And if you walk into a room repeatedly throughout the year, and your normal experience is that you're not actually asked directly to contribute, and you don't have to get involved, and you're really tired, you've had an intense day, and you just come for another meeting, and oh, hang on, every time I go here, I can just kind of relax and listen, or sort of listen. Have a little snack because I'm hungry. It's 4:30, and no one makes me do anything, and that just becomes your norm after a while, doesn't it? So you can see exactly how it happens, and it's like someone said to me once: if you're not asked to participate, then you just leave your brain at home because well, that no one ever asked me what I think there, so I'll just leave my brain at home. I don't need it. I can save my energy for something else. So yeah, I do see that all the time.
Is there something in there about timing around? Sorry, but about timing around meetings, Sam, because I'm just thinking as well that after school meetings are sometimes the worst possible time to have creative thinking and participation. Because like you say, people are knackered. They've just done a really, really busy day with a potentially taught all day, phoned 3 parents, split up something at lunchtime, had to follow up a load of other things, done 1,000 emails, and now do this.
Yeah, although my argument to that would be that when you create really purposeful meetings and environments, it can completely snap people out of the reality of what happened that day, and make them feel like they're part of a really productive, joyful process. Or hey, oh wow, we massively improved something we understood or do today in that meeting, and then they forget about all those things and they feel like their time was used wisely. So yeah, it can go both ways.
I definitely think, and one of my sort of insights from this is from applying it to coaching and so on. And I feel like the pair structure is, I would say it's essential. It's like it's a totally essential to flush out concern and people offering critique. Because if that's like volunteered, you've got people harboring things which are never voiced, and at least you can turn to your partner and offload in the meeting. And it just works really well. So everyone's involved. And people like Dylan Williams' research on his teacher and learning communities. He would say this is the kind of the processing of what's happened since our last meeting, and that kind of is the kind of active ingredient, and it needs to systematically involve everybody because if you're not thinking, you're not going to then change your practice and so on. So
yeah, because imagine if you and Emma are sitting next to each other in a meeting, and your head of department says that today we're going to review the marking and feedback policy, and you have a paired discussion. And in that discussion, Emma reveals some real concern she's got about her workload based on this feedback policy. But she says to you in that paired discussion, look, I just don't feel like I can say this out loud to the group because this person's worked really hard and I don't want to make them feel like I'm... But you can take that when you feed back to the group. And then Tom, as an empathetic person, you might go, Well, actually, Emma and I were talking, and I've got a couple of things I'd like to say about and you kind of, there's almost like not safety in numbers because it's not like we're not, it's not us and them, but you can kind of use that paired opportunity to help voice something together in a way that you might not have done otherwise, and that really matters.
Oh, I think that's exactly it. Because then you end up with this thing of you need to have challenge, which is as palatable to people. They need to be able to hear it. And if you're not in the right mind space for that. So one of the things I think about team behavior. So this is see what you think about this, because I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I'm implicitly criticizing people when I say this, but because I am, so maybe it's explicit. Is that there's a lot of focus on coaching and interact one-to-one processes for coaching and feedback. And I'm just absolutely convinced that it's almost a total waste of time, and I say that quite firmly, unless all those people are in a team that is effective. So if let's say I'm in the key stage 2 team, unless our team is working well to drive curriculum and agree basic planning and have good routines and systems, and there's someone there saying, come on guys, we're all doing this, we're all a team, coaching can't touch the sides. It's like you can't coach like 8 key stage 2 teachers into better practice if the teams are kind of dysfunctional and no one's agreed on anything. So I feel like sometimes people have signed up for all this coaching stuff before they've sorted out their team cultures and got teams to be receptive to improvement and shared action. But also it's the fact that when we're doing it together, we move further faster than any number of one-to-ones would ever do. I'm just convinced of that now. But I feel like I'm having to sort of push against the kind of coaching's great. And it is, but only when those things are already there. And sometimes people don't want to hear that. So what do you think? I'm right about that? Or do you think there's a place for both? Or what do you think?
Well, firstly, learning to coach, I did it sort of during COVID, online for sort of 6-month course with Growth Coaching International. Probably the best CPD I've ever done was to learn the kind of innate skills of coaching, having been more of a teller before the way I lead people. But you're right, because if we're a team of 8, like you were saying, and the coach has 8 individual conversations with people about things going on in the team or whatever it might be, you're going down 8 completely opposite directions. And how do you then pull that together? Especially as they were kind of one-to-one confidential conversations. It's really difficult, isn't it? Because everyone's going to have a different view and they're never going to hear each other's view from that coaching conversation. So then your job as a coach, if you're the lead of or the coach lead or whatever, how do you pull all that together? Well, one thing that I found really useful when I did that coaching course, and I've read a couple of Christian Van Nieuwenburgh, his books, he talks about having like a coaching approach or a coaching way of being within teams. So coaching doesn't need to be a formal one-to-one process where you and I have met together and we're contracting about how it can be part of the way the team operates, and you can learn together a few innate key coaching skills and key habits of coaches in your team. Like, sounds really simple. In my book, Andy Buck did a case that I know you did as well, Tom, and you talked about coaching as well. But he talks about just using the principle ask first more in meetings. So if Emma's sharing a challenge that she's experiencing and she leads that aspect of the team's life, then instead of interjecting with your initial thoughts or advice, just have an ask first policy. So before I might think I understand Emma's challenge and I might think I know what she should do, but actually I'm just going to ask a couple of open-ended questions to expand her own thinking before I jump in with my advice. So I think that the teams benefit more when you have a bit of a coaching approach in your normal discussions every day, because that's where like you said, that's where the ideas are. You're all right together, you've got the proximity. So just take the best bits of coaching, which is listening carefully and asking great questions that expand thinking, and apply it to your group environment.
I totally agree with that. So I'm so glad you say that. So I feel that's the same. Like coaching ideas in a team context is actually the sweet spot. Because I mean, you're running a school now. Your instinct isn't to go off and talk to everybody on their own, is it? It's to bring everyone together.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I really think you can apply that to corridor conversations, and it doesn't have to be super formal, even just the way you're kind of, and then practice coaching with each other, and then team members start to do that with each other as well. And that's when it's the sweet spot. It's a bit like kind of psych safety. Like the sweet spot is when it's not just the leader doing that with the members, it's the members talking and interacting like that with each other as well. So, you know, if you've got two heads of year struggling with a bit of challenging way of applying the behaviour policy, I remember a couple of years ago in that pastoral team I mentioned, watching two heads of year having a conversation about this issue, and one of them was saying to the other one, okay, so what are your options at this point? Or, you know, that kind of question. Now I was thinking, no, this is dynamite, because they're not only sharing each other's, you know, kind of lived experience, they're helping each other think more deeply about a problem. So I think that's just brilliant. And then at that point, you can always step away as the leader, and you've got this kind of great team that sort of runs itself.
No, nice.
Just think about that coaching way of being as well can get over the kind of the weirdness and the awkwardness of a forced coaching conversation where you're kind of almost overthinking everything that you're trying to ask and trying to respond with, because it's not a natural situation. But integrating that natural coaching way of being across your teams across the day, I'm guessing for some people would just feel much more natural than having to sit opposite or face to face or side by side and let's now do the coaching.
Absolutely. And also, I find it improves team dynamics, because it's lovely to be listened to by your coach. I think, wow, my coach is such a great active listener. They really hear what I'm saying. But imagine feeling that about your team. Wow, I was sort of stressing out in a meeting the other day about something, and I really felt like I was being listened to and helped through the issue. You know, and that's really powerful. And you think your team care about you, not just in a relational way, but people are trying to help you through the situations you're going through professionally. That's people. You know, we're talking about after school meetings and thinking, oh no, not another off. So you're sort of trudging to your meeting with your cup of coffee. But that's when you look forward to the meetings, when you have experiences like that where you feel like people want you to improve your thinking, they want you to do well, and they're actively taking a part in your development as well. That's when you're like, yes, I can't wait to go to that meeting.
Well, yes, I mean that comes from like the nature of it, the tasks, the way you discuss things, the content. But I also feel like people like to feel like they've got a sense of purpose. But we are in a situation in this country, in England particularly, but it's a pertinent elsewhere as well, where a lot of teachers are still defensive for good reason because of stupid accountability. And a good team leader has to sort of run the sort of, you know, tread the line between challenge and push and come on guys, and also encouragement and support and protection, an instinct to protect. I find that instinct to protect teams very strong across middle leaders, especially. They have this sense of, you know, they're people, and they feel the need to look after them, and I get that instinct. But sometimes that can get in the way of an improvement journey, which is there for the taking if they could only trust that they're being supported. And the skill set to do that as a middle leader is like there's a kind of secret sauce aspect to it, and I find sometimes hard to put my finger on. Like, how do I get that person to be more confident with challenging their team? Have you got any top tips?
I don't want to go down a rabbit hole here, but I will get to your question in a second. But I was thinking recently, I had a bit of feedback from someone whose line manager had attended one of my talks. So I did a talk just on psychological safety and that sweet spot of bringing people with you on the journey, but also having the challenge so that you're kind of doing great things together. And someone said to me, they messaged me and said, you know, one of my team leader or my line manager came to your talk, and they've read the book, they've read Amy Edmondson's book about psychological safety, but they act like the opposite. So they say the right things, but they act the opposite. And I had a couple of people say that to me over the last couple of years, and I was trying to work out, like, can you teach kind of emotional intelligence and how you read a situation to do that really tricky thing that you just described, Tom, of bringing people with you, and so they know that you kind of are invested in them, but also holding a line and pushing forward so that you're actually doing better work as a group and individuals as well. I was trying to work out, like, is there any input that anyone can give people that helps them improve that area of their work? I'm really tussling with it at the moment. I don't know whether you can help someone tread that really narrow tightrope that you just described. And what do you two think?
I was thinking that we've had a similar-ish conversation before, because the only first, like, likeness I could think of was a physiotherapist who kind of takes you to the point of pain but makes you want to keep going because you know it's going to be for the greater good. So I was thinking, I wonder if there's anything in the kind of practitioner-patient relationship dynamic that we could transfer to teachers. I'm not about causing teachers pain, but taking to the point where people might feel like this is uncomfortable, or I can't do this, or I'm not sure about this, and actually getting people over the line to think, you know, you can, and you're really capable of doing this. But I've started to read a little bit more around sort of from the medical field about how you build that trust to make somebody push themselves and potentially do something that they don't necessarily feel in that moment that they can do.
I think that's right. I feel like you need to make that, but I think you need to sort of focus on the problems. And so if I'm not answering my own question anyway, I feel like the thing I found the most useful thing I've come across is the Paul Bambrick Centillo 5Ps process. So you start off with precise praise. You start off meetings, interaction, by saying these specific things are going well. What do you think's been going well? Looking at specifics, like we said we'd do that. Is it working? Where do you find it's working? And let's give some examples. But then you do this thing called probe. You say, so where have the problems been? Where have the outcomes been less than you'd have liked? Which children aren't doing as well as the others? And you problem solve. And then you say, so what solutions do we have? And then you problem solve again. So it's all you has a process to pin your thing on, and the protocol allows you to work through it. And you can teach that. So you can't teach person the kind of the interpersonal secret sauce, but you can give them a framework to run through to sort of say the things, and it does deliver. Some people have told me that just starting off meetings with precise praise was a game changer. Like we used to just have like a long, boring agenda or moans, and now we just go, what's going well, and all that kind of thing. So I feel like you can teach protocols, and that's perhaps as much. But there is that sort of bit in between, like when people are chasing around. It's not in the meeting; it's every interaction. It's their sort of the things they bothered about, the things they raise, the things they notice. And I think the only way to teach that is to do it with them and see what you notice and say, what did you notice? This is what I noticed, and see if you're doing the same. I think it's sort of you have to share it with them.
I think that's a really great phrase. What did you notice, or what do you notice? I think that's great. A lot of the sort of teams literature from the sort of 80s and 90s, and from people like Hackman and Katzenbach and Smith, they talked a lot about how you don't just turn up to a place and feel like you're a team because you get sat next to a group of people and told that you're a team. You have to have that, what you sort of describing, Tom, that performance challenge. So teams have to coalesce around a compelling performance challenge, or they won't feel like they're a team. So I totally agree that hinging everything around, right, our big performance challenges, the things we're really working on together are this and this. So it kind of let's front load that and agree now that we really believe that those are important challenges for us as a team. And let's also agree that we will give each other some feedback along the way about how far we're moving in the right direction with that. And I want you to give me feedback as a leader because I care about this just as much as anyone. So I need to know how I can improve what we're doing. And sometimes I'll give you feedback about how I think you can contribute even more to that performance challenge, because we know we really believe in it. We're super enthused about it, and that's how the dynamic's going to work. And kind of front loading it, and then, like you said, then there's a whole lot of stuff in between that about how sensitively you deal with that at the time. And
Mistakes, but I think modeling is another way. So I mean, you probably do this well, but you then have to. So one of the things I've seen, gosh, we're going to run out of time. Look at this; it's nearly an hour as well. But there's a school, it's called Battle Primary School in Reading. I'm sure they won't mind me saying. And we saw a lovely process there where you had a deputy and the head, a sort of modelled a team coaching, and they had sort of half the school each, and ran that for a few months. And then they split up into the phase leads. 4 phase leads took that on, and what they would do lesson observations and stuff, whilst the head and deputy covered them and took their classes, which was good. But they had seen how to run their team discussions from the others who'd already modelled it to them. So there's kind of a direct handover of a system and a culture.
the whole thing will kind of live or die by the first time a team member gives you feedback as a leader in that team meeting, how do you deal with that? Because again, I've seen that go. The team leader's invited feedback and then been really defensive when it's come, and of course that just kills it for everyone else, because you're never going to give your team leader or anyone else on the team feedback again if that's what it was modeled. So it's all about modeling. And how do you model? I remember once talking about the uniform policy and how we needed to be a little bit kind of tighter with how we kind of deal with it, what we accept becomes acceptable around school and all of that kind of thing. And then someone sort of piped up and said, well, I saw you talking to that girl in year 10 the other day, and you completely overlooked the fact that her shirt was untucked, and you're telling us how important that is. And at the time, she had like a really awful morning, that girl. There was so much going on in her life. And I just thought, right, I'm going to deal with the conversation first and then the shirt afterwards. And I felt like saying that back in the meeting. But I thought, you know what, that doesn't get anyone anywhere. So you know what, you're right. I could have addressed that more publicly to show the other students and the staff around how I would deal with that in a sort of polite but kind of, clear way. And hopefully me kind of modeling that humility, going, yeah, you know what, you're right. I could have done that better. Hopefully that would lead in the future to more willingness to share feedback. So it's all about modeling.
Oh, Sam, I've just had a thought. Do you know, like you do your case studies in your vignettes and things in your writing? Have you ever thought about using episodes of The Apprentice as the worst possible? When they set up their teams and they decide who's the leader and who's going to do what? As you were talking, I'm thinking, what's the opposite of everything Sam's been talking about today?
We all know where The Apprentice has led, don't we? Anyway. So look, it's so fascinating, and I love. People who've not read the book, it's got a lovely sort of it's like easy sort of engagement because it's so relatable, but it's got this sort of lovely mixture of sort of research, ideas, philosophy, but also super practical things. So I really recommend anyone who's a team leader buy the book, because you'll get tons of thinking from it. And just wish you continued luck with and success with your work in this brilliant thing of taking on a primary school. And I hope it's fantastic. And hopefully you're right. I know you've been writing a blog and keeping when you find a bit of time, but keep us posted with how it's going.
Yeah, thank you. I'm working on another book at the moment, actually. So I'm just a few months into that process.
Any hints of what it's called?
So it's about how we can understand more about, well, we've done a lot of work in education about cognitive science in lessons, and then kind of ignored the fact we then go off to meetings and team experiences where there's absolutely no harnessing of how the brain actually might work for people. So I'm looking at how cognitive science and teams and leadership can kind of come together so that we actually utilize the way people are actually thinking and will think in meetings and team experiences. So.
Oh, that is just awesome. I love that. That's going to be great. I'm buying that now. Honestly, I'm sorry it took us so long to get you on, but I'm really glad we've had this chat. It's been absolutely brilliant.
I've had a great time. Thank you. Yeah, thanks very much.
Thanks, Sam.
Okay, well, look, thanks again to everyone listening to Mind the Gap. We're always thrilled by the level of engagement we have, people listening across the world, lots of people in Australia, particularly, I know follow, but also, the Middle East, Southeast Asia. I meet people everywhere I go who listen to Mind the Gap. It's just brilliant. So thank you for listening. Thank you to Sam, and we'll see you on another episode soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Mind the Gap. I'm Emma Turner, and I've been presenting with my co-host Tom Sherrington. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review, share on social media, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Find us on our YouTube channel, search for Mind the Gap with Tom and Emma, or head over to Spotify for an audio version. This podcast was produced in association with Haringey Education Partnership, and our producer for today's episode was Luke Kemper.